The dyno trailer sat in the gravel lot behind the Scott County Extension Office on a Saturday morning in late March 1998, and Vincent Kohler was the only man there who wasn't driving green iron. His 1996 Massey Ferguson 8160 idled at the edge of the lot, red paint bright against the brown Kansas dirt. Vincent had bought it 18 months earlier from a dealer in Garden City, paying $87,000 cash after selling his old white 2135 and a section of dryland wheat that hadn't turned a profit in 3 years. The 8160 had a Valmet-built inline-six, 160 horsepower at the PTO, and a reputation for fuel efficiency that nobody in Scott County had ever bothered to verify, because nobody in Scott County ran Massey Ferguson. 3 John Deere 30 Series tractors were already lined up near the dyno, 2 8300s and 1 8400. All newer than Vincent's Massey, all higher horsepower on paper, all owned by men who'd been buying green iron since before Vincent's father retired. The dyno day wasn't supposed to be competitive. Tom Rucker, the extension agent, had organized it as a casual data gathering event, PTO horsepower verification and fuel economy comparison for farmers curious about their machine's real-world output. No prizes, no rankings, just numbers. But the moment Vincent backed the 8160 off the trailer, Carl Drescher looked up from his 8400 and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Didn't know Massey Ferguson still made tractors." Vincent didn't respond. He climbed down, checked the PTO shaft, and walked toward the trailer where Tom was setting up the load cell. Carl was 62, third-generation wheat and Milo, and he'd financed every piece of equipment he owned through Holt Implement, the John Deere dealer in Scott City. His 8400 was 8 months old, 225 horsepower. Power shift transmission. He'd paid $142,000 for it, and he'd told half the county it was the best tractor he'd ever owned. The other 2 operators, Randy Voss and Gil Erickson, ran matching 8300s, both bought used in '96. They were younger than Carl, quieter, but they'd both grown up on Deere equipment, and neither of them had ever considered anything else. Tom Rucker clipped his notes to a board and motioned toward the dyno. "We'll run PTO tests first. 30-second pulls at rated RPM. Then we'll do fuel economy under load. Who's first?" Carl stepped forward. "Let's get it done." The 8400 went first. Carl backed it up to the dyno, connected the PTO shaft, and let the engine settle at 2100 RPM. Tom flipped the switch, and the load cell began pulling resistance through the driveline. The engine roared. Black smoke puffed from the exhaust for 2 seconds, then cleared. The dyno's needle climbed. Tom watched the gauge and called out the number, 218 horsepower at the PTO. Carl shut it down, climbed out, and nodded. "That's 7 below advertised, but it's close enough." Randy's first 8300 tested at 172 horsepower. Gil's came in at 175, both within spec, both unremarkable. Then Vincent backed the Massey Ferguson into position. The 8160 was smaller than the Deere's, lighter, less chrome. But when Vincent connected the PTO and throttled up, the Valmet engine settled into a smooth, steady roar that didn't fluctuate. No smoke, no surge, just constant power. Tom activated the load cell. The dyno pulled. The Massey held. 30 seconds passed. Tom checked the gauge twice before he called it out. 174 horsepower. Carl's head snapped up. "That's impossible." Tom tapped the gauge. "That's what it says." Randy leaned in. "What's it rated at?" 160, Vincent said. Carl crossed his arms. "Then it's modified." Tom looked at Vincent. "Is it stock?" "Completely." "Bullshit," Carl said. "You don't get 14 over on a stock tractor." Tom held up a hand. "We can check the engine. If Vincent says it's stock, we'll verify it." Vincent climbed down and walked to the front of the Massey. He popped the hood and stepped back. "Look for yourself." Tom climbed up, checked the injection pump, inspected the turbo, and ran his hand along the intake manifold. After 2 minutes, he stepped down. "It's stock." Carl stared at the tractor like it had insulted him. "Then your dyno's wrong." Tom shook his head. "Dyno's calibrated. I tested it this morning against a reference load." Randy looked at Gil. Gil looked at the Massey Ferguson. Neither of them said anything. Carl walked back to his 8400 and leaned against the fender. His jaw was tight. His hands were in his pockets. He didn't look at Vincent. Tom made a note on his clipboard. "Let's move to fuel economy." The fuel test was brutal. Each tractor ran a full-throttle PTO load for 1 hour, while Tom measured fuel consumption with a calibrated flow meter. The test simulated heavy field work, the kind of load a tractor sees pulling a chisel plow through hard ground or running a grain auger at capacity. Carl's 8400 burned 11.2 gallons. Randy's 8300 burned 9.8 gallons. Gil's 8300 burned 9.4 gallons. Vincent's 8160 burned 8.1 gallons. Tom read the numbers twice before writing them down. Then he did the math and wrote the efficiency rating in the margin, 21.5 horsepower hours per gallon. Carl's 8400 had managed 18.9. Tom looked up. That's a 12% improvement. Randy whistled low. That's not small. Carl said nothing. He walked to his truck, climbed in, and sat there with the door open, staring at the Massey Ferguson. Vincent stayed by the dyno. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just stood there, hands on his hips, waiting for someone to say something. Gil finally broke the silence. "What'd you pay for that Massey?" 87, Vincent said. "And it does that every day?" "Every day." Randy looked at Gil. "That's 40,000 less than Carl's 8400. Carl heard it. Everyone heard it. He climbed out of his truck, slammed the door, and walked back toward the group. His face was red. "You want to tell me that thing outworks a deer?" Vincent met his eyes. "I just did." "In the field?" "In the field." Carl stepped closer. "Then let's see it. Bring that Massey into my back 40 and pull a chisel plow next to my 8400. We'll see what it does when it's actually working." Tom stepped between them. "Carl, this was a baseline test. It's not a challenge. I'm making it one." Vincent didn't blink. "When?" "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, my place." Vincent nodded. "I'll be there." By Sunday morning, half the county knew about the test. Carl had called 4 people Saturday night. Randy had called 6. By the time Vincent loaded the 8160 onto his trailer Sunday at noon, his phone had rung twice. Once from a farmer in Dighton who wanted to know if the Massey Ferguson really beat the deers, and once from a man Vincent didn't know who said he'd heard the dyno was rigged. Vincent didn't answer the second call. He pulled into Carl's farm at 1:50 p.m. Carl's 8400 was already in the field, hooked to a 9-shank chisel plow. 20 people were parked along the fence line. Some had brought lawn chairs. 2 had coolers. This wasn't a test anymore. It was a show. Carl waved Vincent over. "You pull the north half, I'll pull the south. Whoever finishes first wins." Tom Rucker was there too. He walked up to Vincent's truck. "You don't have to do this." "I know. Carl's trying to embarrass you. He already tried that yesterday." Tom looked at the crowd. "If you lose, this gets ugly." Vincent climbed out of the truck. "I'm not going to lose." He unloaded the 8160, hooked it to Carl's spare chisel plow, and drove to the north end of the field. Carl lined up at the south end. The field was 80 acres of hard-packed clay, unworked since fall, the kind of ground that eats fuel and tests every bearing in a driveline. Tom stood between them with a stopwatch. He raised his hand. "On 3. 1, 3. Both tractors dropped into gear and pulled. The 8400 had more horsepower. It had a heavier frame. It had $40,000 worth of engineering that John Deere had spent decades perfecting. But the 8160 had something Carl hadn't accounted for: weight distribution. The Massey Ferguson's shorter wheelbase and lower center of gravity kept the rear tires planted through every pass. The 8400's longer frame flexed under load, lifting the front end slightly on the turns and scrubbing speed. By the 3rd pass, Vincent was half a length ahead. By the 6th pass, he was a full length ahead. Carl throttled up. The 8400 roared. Black smoke poured from the stack. The tractor surged forward, pulled even, then started to gain. But halfway through the 8th pass, the engine stuttered. Carl looked back. The chisel plow had hit a rock, and the shank had bent. He throttled down, stopped, and climbed off to inspect the damage. Vincent kept going. By the time Carl got the plow straightened and restarted, Vincent had finished his half of the field. He shut down the Massey Ferguson, climbed off, and walked to the fence line where the crowd had gathered. Nobody said anything for 10 seconds. Then Randy Voss walked up to Vincent and stuck out his hand. "That's a hell of a tractor." Vincent shook it. "Thanks." Gil Erickson nodded from his truck. He didn't come over, but he didn't leave either. Carl finished his half 20 minutes later. He unhooked the plow, drove the 8400 back to the shed, and went inside his house without speaking to anyone. Tom Rucker packed up his stopwatch and walked over to Vincent. "You just made an enemy. I didn't start this." "Doesn't matter. Carl's got pull in this county, and he finances everything through Holt Implement." Vincent looked at the 8160. So you've got a John Deere combine, and Carl knows the dealer who sold it to you." Vincent's combine was a 9600, bought in 1995 from Holt Implement on a 5-year note. He still owed $48,000 on it. The payments came out of his operating line every October, and the relationship with Holt had always been clean until now. On Monday morning, Vincent got a call from Brad Michaels, the sales manager at Holt. "Vincent, we need to talk about your combine." "What about it?" "Your note comes due in October. We're reviewing accounts." "I've never missed a payment." "I know, but we're restructuring our lending priorities. I wanted to give you a heads up." Vincent sat down. "What does that mean?" "It means we might not be able to extend your line this fall." "Brad, I've been buying from you for 8 years." "I know, but things change." Vincent knew exactly what this was. "Carl called you." Brad didn't answer right away. Then, "I can't discuss other customers." "You don't have to. I know what this is." "Vincent, it's just business." "No, it's retaliation." Brad's tone hardened. "If you want to finance your combine somewhere else, that's your choice. But if you want to keep working with us, I'd suggest you think about how you represent equipment in this county." Vincent hung up. By May, 2 things had happened. Randy Voss traded his 8300 for a Massey Ferguson 8120. He did it quietly, through a dealer in Dodge City, and he didn't tell anyone until the tractor showed up on his farm. When Carl found out, he stopped speaking to Randy entirely. Gil Erickson didn't trade, but he called Vincent one night and asked if he could test drive the 8160. Vincent said yes. Gil ran it for 4 hours, pulling a disc through spring wheat stubble, and when he brought it back, he said, "I'm thinking about it." 3 weeks later, Gil bought a used Massey Ferguson 8140 from an estate sale in Colby. He paid $54,000 for it, $20,000 less than a comparable John Deere, and he ran it the rest of the season without a single breakdown. Carl didn't speak to Gil after that either, but Vincent's victory was starting to cost him. In July, Vincent's 9600 combine threw a feeder chain during wheat harvest. It wasn't catastrophic, but it needed parts. He called Holt Implement to order a replacement chain and a set of bearings. Brad Michaels answered, "We're back ordered on 9600 parts. Might be 3 weeks." "3 weeks? I'm in the middle of harvest." "I'm sorry. Supply chain's tight this year." Vincent knew it was a lie. He called a Deere dealer in Sublet and got the parts in 2 days. But the message was clear. Holt Implement was done with him. By September, Vincent had a decision to make. His combine note was due in 6 weeks. Holt Implement had already told him they wouldn't extend his operating line, which meant he'd need to pay off the $48,000 balance or refinance through another lender. He had the cash, but it would drain his operating account and leave him thin for spring inputs. Or he could trade the combine. But trade it for what? If he stayed with John Deere and went back to Holt, he'd be admitting that the dyno test and everything that followed had been a mistake. He'd be walking back into Carl's world, Carl's dealer, Carl's system, and Carl would know it. If he switched to Massey Ferguson, he'd be burning the last bridge he had with Holt Implement. He'd be all in on a brand that had no dealer support within 50 miles. And if the combine failed, he'd be stranded. But there was a third option. Vincent could pay off the Deere and run it until it died. Keep the Massey Ferguson tractor. Prove that a man didn't need to be loyal to one brand to make a living. Prove that the numbers mattered more than the paint color. But that would mean walking away from the fight, and Vincent wasn't sure he could do that. He called Tom Rucker in mid-September. "Tom, I need your opinion." "On what?" "On whether I made a mistake." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You didn't make a mistake. That Massey Ferguson is a good tractor. But it cost me my dealer. It didn't cost you your dealer. Carl did." "Same result." Tom sighed. "Vincent, you proved your point. You beat 3 John Deeres on a dyno and in the field. Randy and Gil both switched because of you. You won. Then why does it feel like I lost? Because Carl's making you pay for it. and he's going to keep making you pay until you either give up or outlast him. How do I outlast him? You keep farming, you keep running that Massey, and you don't let him force you into a decision you don't want to make. Vincent hung up. On October 12, 1998, Vincent walked into First National Bank in Scott City and paid off the remaining $48,000 on his John Deere 9600 combine. He used every dollar in his operating account and a chunk of his savings. It left him with $11,000 in cash and a combine he owned outright. He didn't trade it. He didn't go back to Holt Implement. He didn't buy a Massey Ferguson combine. He just walked away from the debt. 2 days later, he ran into Carl at the co-op. Carl was standing by the seed display, talking to another farmer. When Vincent walked in, Carl looked up, saw him, and turned his back. Vincent bought his seed, paid cash, and left. By spring 1999, the dyno test had faded from conversation. Randy Voss was running his Massey Ferguson 8120 without issues. Gil Erickson's 8140 had pulled spring tillage with zero downtime, and Vincent's 8160 was still the most fuel-efficient tractor in Scott County. But Carl Drescher had sold his 8400. He'd traded it in February for a new 8410, paying $160,000 and rolling the negative equity into the new loan. He told people it was an upgrade. He told people the 8400 had transmission problems, but everyone knew the truth. Carl couldn't stand looking at the tractor that lost to a Massey Ferguson. In June, Vincent got a call from a farmer in Finney County. The man had heard about the dyno test and wanted to know if Vincent would be willing to bring the 8160 to a field day his local extension office was organizing. Vincent said no. The man asked why. Vincent looked out the window at the Massey Ferguson, sitting in the shed next to the John Deere combine he'd paid off 8 months earlier. He thought about Carl. He thought about Brad Michaels. He thought about the two friends who'd switched to Massey Ferguson and the dealer who'd tried to punish him for proving a point. "Because I already made my point," Vincent said, "and I'm done fighting about it." But the fight wasn't done with him. In August 1999, Vincent's 9600 combine broke down during wheat harvest. The rotor drive shaft snapped, and the machine seized in the middle of a field. He called 3 dealers. None of them could get him a replacement shaft in less than a week. He called Holt Implement as a last resort. Brad Michaels answered, "Vincent, it's been a while. I need a rotor shaft for a 9600. Emergency. I'll check inventory." Brad put him on hold. 2 minutes later, he came back. "We've got one, but it's $3,200, and we need payment up front." Vincent knew that was twice the normal price. He also knew he didn't have a choice. "I'll be there in an hour." When he walked into Holt Implement, Brad was waiting at the parts counter. He didn't smile. He didn't make small talk. He just rang up the part, took Vincent's credit card, and handed him the receipt. As Vincent walked out, Brad called after him. "Next time you want to prove a point, make sure you can afford the consequences." Vincent stopped. He turned around. "I can afford it." "Can you?" Vincent looked at Brad for a long moment. Then he walked out. By fall 1999, Vincent had made a decision. He wasn't going to trade the John Deere combine. He wasn't going to buy a Massey Ferguson combine. He wasn't going to walk back into Holt Implement and apologize. He was going to keep farming the way he always had, with the best equipment he could afford, regardless of the brand, and without asking permission from Carl Drescher or Brad Michaels or anyone else. In October, he paid cash for a used Massey Ferguson 8150 from an estate sale in Nebraska. He hauled it back to Kansas and parked it next to the 8160. 2 red tractors, 1 green combine. No apologies. Randy Voss saw them and grinned. "You really don't give a damn, do you?" Vincent shook his head. Not anymore. By 2001, Carl Drescher had left the co-op board. He'd cited health reasons, but everyone knew it was because Randy and Gil had both switched to Massey Ferguson, and he couldn't sit in the same room with them anymore. Brad Michaels left Holt Implement in 2002 to take a job with a dealership in Wichita. His replacement didn't know about the dyno test and didn't care. When Vincent called to order parts for his 9600 in 2003, the new manager treated him like any other customer. But the damage was done. Vincent never bought another piece of equipment from Holt Implement. He bought his next tractor, a Massey Ferguson 8220 from a dealer in Colby in 2004. He bought his next combine, a Massey Ferguson 9790, from the same dealer in 2007. And when people asked him why he ran Massey Ferguson, he didn't tell them about the dyno test. He didn't tell them about Carl or Brad or the rotor shaft that cost him $3,200. He just said, because the numbers don't lie. In 2010, Vincent ran into Carl at a farm auction in Dighton. Carl was there to bid on a grain cart. Vincent was there to look at a used planter. They stood on opposite sides of the auction ring for 20 minutes, neither of them acknowledging the other. Then, just before the bidding started, Carl walked over. Vincent. Vincent looked up. Carl. Carl stared at the ground for a moment, then looked Vincent in the eye. That Massey Ferguson, the 8160, you still run it? Every day. Carl nodded slowly. I should have listened. Vincent didn't say anything. Carl turned and walked away. Vincent Kohler farmed in Scott County until 2018. He ran Massey Ferguson tractors for 20 years after the dyno test and never had a catastrophic failure. His fuel costs stayed 10 to 12% below the county average. His equipment held its value. And his operating margins stayed tight even through the commodity crashes of 2008 and 2014. He never went back to Holt Implement. He never spoke to Brad Michaels again. And he never ran another tractor against a John Deere in public. Because he didn't need to. The dyno had already told the truth. And in western Kansas, in 1998, when Vincent Kohler backed that red Massey Ferguson up to the load cell and let it pull, the truth was this. Horsepower doesn't care about paint color, fuel efficiency doesn't care about legacy, and a man who proves his point in front of a crowd better be ready for the county to remember it. Vincent was ready, and the county never forgot.